Hello, I'm Forrest Libran, S. Forrester Libran, my author name. I wrote this book, it's 2018 now, so I wrote it back in 2012. It was 2012 because one of the main reasons I wrote this was because I was very excited for Peter Jackson's The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. I grew up as a big fan of his Lord of the Rings films and a fan of those books and The Hobbit, which I think I honestly favor over the Lord of the Rings trilogy, personally, in terms of reading. So I was very excited for The Hobbit to be adapted to film. I was deeply, deeply, deeply disappointed in the Hobbit movies. In fact, I never even saw the last one because I just didn't care at that point. But that's not what this is about. Back in 2012, I was excited for the film because I loved the book, so I reread the book in anticipation for the film, which is probably a mistake if a adaptation of a book you like is being turned into a film. It's best to distance yourself from the book because your odds of enjoying the film, in my opinion, go way up when you've forgotten what actually happens in the book. But again, that's me being bitter and angry towards 90% of adaptations of books I've liked in my life. They've all been just train wrecks. Except for The Lord of the Rings. Decent enough. Some flaws, but they hold up. They're great. Anyway, The Beast King. Up until that point, I'd written several kind of young adult fantasy stories mixing this world and monsters, and I was more in a kind of Narnia mindset, except that the creatures were here on Earth. No one was going to a magical world. It was just kind of hidden. But I finally decided after rereading The Hobbit back in 2012 that I wanted to just write a good old-fashioned, straightforward fantasy story on a secondary world, made up, fictional, pseudo-medieval creatures and monsters and swords and heroes and all that stuff. So that's The Beast King. There are some similarities to The Hobbit. I will admit that before you've read it. Just know that I'm aware. It wasn't just subconscious plagiarism. There's just some basic, rough similarities. The essential plot to the story is the hero is going back to his homeland to take back his house from a monster. So there you have the dwarves going back to the Lonely Mountain to reclaim their Erebor, their kingdom, from Smaug, the dragon. And that's pretty much where the similarities stop. But that same summer, I was not only reading Tolkien, I was reading a lot of Rudyard Kipling, who I think has fallen by the wayside nowadays, unfortunately. He was an incredibly prolific writer and very clever, very intelligent, very nuanced in a lot of ways that people don't give him credit for, even with his kids' stories. The Jungle Book, which is vaguely like the Disney versions. And the Disney versions are fine. They're highly entertaining. I haven't seen the newer one, which was just a remake of the older one. Again, we're back into the soullessness of filmmaking, but I do enjoy the 1960s animated version of the Jungle Book. But the book itself, by Rudyard Kipling, is exciting, and there's war, and there's actual death and fighting, and Mowgli rises up to be more of the king of the jungle rather than you must go back to your own kind because you don't belong here. That's not really the story of the Jungle Book, actually. And there's a lot of just cool, beautiful, classical language in it, a lot of these and thous, and Baloo is more of the disciplinarian in command, teaching Mowgli the ways of the law of the jungle, how to survive, how to honor the other animals, and how everyone maneuvers around one another in the jungle, all their hierarchy and all their rules of decorum and conduct. Whereas Bagheera's more of the rogue off to the side. Bagheera the Black Panther is more of the wild card in the situation. Anyway, I think I was rereading The Jungle Book at the time, but I was reading other short stories of his or bits of stories by Kipling and his poetry, which, I mean, he just wrote so many poems. It's amazing. It's astounding. And his language is just always rich and powerful, and all the words are very purposeful, and just certain lines stick out to you, or just certain rhythms. I think there's a cadence of one poem that I borrowed heavily from for a chapter, for a poem and a chapter. And it was Kipling. It was from the Jungle Book, but it was just this very warlike, chanting, sort of heroic, but serious and grim kind of beat to it. And that, I think that just that poem alone inspired one or two chapters in the book, from Kipling to the Beast King. It's more of the music of his writing than the content that has a strong influence, or had a strong influence over the writing of this book. If I recall correctly, I think I was also reading George MacDonald at the time, his book Fantastes, which is about a young man basically wandering through fairyland. Not the Keebler elf version you might be thinking of, but just the world of tree spirits and knights and chivalry, all these lost things. It's an interesting book. It's, to be honest, it's kind of dull at times, but it also has some really, really cool moments. He goes to the Fairy Queen's castle, which is seemingly empty, yet he can hear voices, and it's just beautiful marble and all this. I'm not the greatest fan of MacDonald's style, but the content is pretty cool, and it captures a very romantic spirit. And I tried to infuse that into the Beast King as well. You need to know outright there are no elves or orcs or things of that nature in this story. There are a couple of dwarves, and they are silly fools that kind of appear and disappear, and there's no real... They're not Tolkien's dwarves. They're not the World of Warcraft or any modern iterations of dwarves. They're just little silly men with beards. Now, a lot of the conflict in this book is more fable-like. A lot of the creatures are bizarre and kind of deformed versions of actual animals, or they are just entirely their own thing. It all takes place in the wilderness, which is the perfect location for an adventure story. There are hints at civilization in the outer regions, but the heroes are going through territory where they only have rumors and legends and vague memories to guide them, essentially. This is certainly more violent than my past couple of books, Trixie and Roy. I guess there's a little bit of fighting in Trixie and Roy, but it's mostly cartoonish. The Sassafras 3, there's some fighting and death, but again, it's kind of cartoonish, and it's only to a certain group of nefarious characters. The Beast King has much more wanton, random, chaotic fighting in it. It's not Game of Thrones level. It's not brutal for the sake of being brutal. There's not much gore or anything, but there is quite a lot of violence and battle. I want to be sure to read the summary synopsis. I'm going to put on my acting fake British dramatic voice for this, so here we go. As a boy, Cloud was banished from his castle home by an invading beast. Now, a man, Cloud journeys back north to reclaim the castle from the monster, who styles himself a king and has opened his doors to all manner of creatures and cursed fellows. In his exile, Cloud lived as a soldier of the right ruler's kingdom. Released from service, he is joined by his good friend Alder to see his quest through. But the lands beyond the right ruler's domain are governed by no man. It is a fair country north, yet unsettled and unknown. Thieves abound. Dark rivers rage with rapids and war. Cannibals, cults, strange shepherds, giant brutes. And if the heroes survive what lies before them, their purpose at journey's end is to conquer a castle of beasts, or die. This is a high fantasy tale with swords, sorcery, spirits, and strife. There are no elves or orcs here, but a mottled land of strangers, mystery, and adventure. There you go. If that doesn't intrigue you, I don't know what will. That's my best attempt at selling this thing to you fine people. There's also been some confusion about the illustrations, the drawings. They are not done by myself for this book. I've done the illustrations for Trixie and Roy and the Sassafras 3, but not for the Beast King. They were the Beast King's drawings were done several years ago by a good friend of mine, Daniel Song, very talented artist. Mostly does graphic design, but I wanted to work with him at that time, and I also, several years back, my own drawings were quite just cartoonish and doodle-like. There was just no chance of me drawing anything for myself that would be worth printing. So fortunately, Daniel Song worked on this book and came up with quite a number of really great drawings. I think there's over 30 of them. The style I wanted was one that was reminiscent of medieval artwork, very two-dimensional profiles of people, more often than not, just very kind of flat and kind of puppet-like. You're looking at people kind of arranged in this fashion as if they're like on a stage performing a scene, a tableau or whatever. So I wanted that sort of style, and I think Daniel did a really great job of capturing it. The characters, the hero Cloud, if you want to call him a hero, the main character. Cloud is the boy who is banished and has grown into a man who journeys back north to reclaim his family's castle from the monster. He is a boastful character. He is a light-hearted character, at least he tries to be. He's a colorful, determined, and sometimes severe person. His friend Alder, much more laid back, or at least in demeanor and presentation. He's an old friend of Cloud's, both served as soldiers in the Right Ruler's royal army. And now he goes north with his friend to protect him and see the quest through. When they were soldiers, Cloud saved Alder's life on several occasions, and Alder feels honor-bound to repay such a costly gift. There are many other characters, some of the other human characters that appear here and there throughout the story. There's a young man named Vol. Vol is the son of no living man or woman. He calls himself a knock boy, meaning he is knocked about from one job to the next, from working as a farmhand or a bar lad. But of course, like any young man, especially one of such low prospects, he wants to better himself and better his position in the world. His story intertwines at some point with the characters. Again, I have such a hard time trying to sell the story without telling the story. There's also a man called Trouto. He claims he is a magician. He is not young. He is plump and pretends or declares that he has knowledge of the magical arts. Whether that's true or not, who knows? Bears a giant pack on his back and a wispy beard on his chin. Trouto, the quote-unquote magician. There's quite a lot of animalism in this story. There are men and there are beasts. And there's this sort of struggle between the two. A lot of struggle to survive, to prevail. These heroes are not going about with armor or weapons. They are basically traveling as vagabonds on this quest. I was hoping to, first and foremost, when I write anything, is to have fun with it and to deliver that fun to the reader as well. To make something exciting and enjoyable and something you can laugh at, but also be concerned for the characters and worried about the outcome of the story, what will happen. But it's a far more savage story than some fantasy stories. They don't come across cities, thriving marketplaces. They don't meet with people who present them with marvelous gifts that will come in handy the next chapter, magical items that will save the day at the last second. It is a story of destitution and survival and trying to prevail and overcome against perceived threats and evil. And ultimately, it's a story about relationships, friendship, whether it endures or fails. Quite a lot of tests of trust and sticking together in this story, and quite a lot of pain as well for some characters. There are questions about existence, about purpose, about what matters in life, and the litany of creatures in it is probably a bit overstuffed, to be honest, looking back at it. I said before, there aren't elves, there aren't orcs. Instead, you have the Oddlich, the stone toppers. You have golems, not golem, you have golems. Voices in the air, men that look like animals, animals that look like men. Aquatic dragons, a towering boulder littered with skeletons. It's also a story where you don't really have anyone who is sort of the encyclopedia character. You know, you have the newcomer and he's like, who are these people? What's this place? And someone tells them exactly the exact truth of who or where they are. I suppose it happens once or twice when it actually has personal relevance to some of the characters. But most everything in the story is, I heard this rumor. Well, I've heard this legend. Well, I don't think that's, I think these people are dangerous. I think this area is haunted, and it's all conjecture and rumor and myth or reality, who knows, but there's no Gandalf character, there's no Elrond, there's no tour guide who's like, actually, this sword was forged in blah, 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 It's a very learn-as-you-go story for the heroes. So it's an open playing field, open frontier of discovery and brutality and fear and mistrust and discernment. There's nothing about it that's, let's save the world, let's save humanity from the Dark Lord. That is not what this story is about. There is, I think, a constant feeling of being lost and feeling chaos closing in on you at every turn. Yeah, really, it's more character-driven than plot-driven, but the plot is clearly there. So hopefully this was interesting to you, and you are intrigued enough to try it out. If not, there are other books I've written. Take a look. Go to my website, forestlibrand.com, or Amazon, and look at the various stories that are up there that you can purchase and read. They're all quite fanciful and whimsical and hopefully meaningful. All the fools. I also recorded a reading of the first chapter of The Beast King, replete with my horrible fake English accents that are a little inconsistent here and there, but it should be entertaining at the very least. So that's, I think, linked here in this description for this video. Otherwise, you can find it. If you've ever been on YouTube, you know what to do. Buy The Beast King and enjoy it.